This video describes how I tracked down an air leak in my marine diesel fuel system. You can see in the background the two Raycor filters, and in the foreground you can see the air trap that I developed. This drove me nuts for a long time, trying to find the air leak. It would cause my engines to pulsate, my single engine to pulsate, and I really couldn't figure out where the air was coming from. I'd find the filter housings, especially on the secondary filter on the engine, half full of air when I'd change it, and as I said, the engine would pulsate. So I started experimenting with these air traps, and this is one. It was kind of one of the latest ones that I did, where I put a T in the fuel line and came up to a piece of clear hose, and then on the top of the hose I had a way to let the air escape to fill that air trap with fuel. So I'd start out with it filled with fuel. You can see this is a quarter turn valve that I can open up, and then I've got on this system electric fuel pump so that I can close the valve on the main line and force the fuel to go through the fuel pump. Otherwise it just recirculates if you don't have this valve to close off when you're pumping the fuel. And so I'd close off this valve, open up this valve, turn on the electric pump, and that would pump the fuel up into this, drive out the air. And as soon as the air trap was full of fuel, I'd shut this quarter turn valve off. And then as I was running the engine, I would check it every once in a while. And when I had the air leak, what would happen is that after a while this tube would start to fill up with air, and it would eventually just get down, if I ran long enough without refilling the air trap, it would get down so that the air would start to go through the fuel system again instead of coming up into the air trap, and I'd get the engine pulsing. So this did two things. It helped me to find out where the air leak was, and it alleviated the symptoms of the air leak as long as I had the air trap full of fuel, or as long as it hadn't filled up with air. So that's one of them, and the latest round of this, the air leak proved frustrating because it would seem that everything I did with fittings and things would help, but then I'd still have the air leak. The latest thing that I did, I bypassed the two big Raycors, ran through a Model 500 Raycor instead, and I didn't have any air leak, so I completely rebuilt those Raycors, all new seals and O-rings, and now I'm hoping that that will solve that problem, but I really won't know until I really put some running time on the engine, having rebuilt those Raycors. The other little air trap that I devised, a little more compact. Again, this was pretty far along in my development, trying to figure out how to track down this air leak. I used a little glass inline filter, but I put it on a T right next to my secondary fuel filter on my diesel engine. And so the same principle, I've got a quarter turn valve on top of the filter so that I can let the air out. I turn on the electric pump, fill up that filter, that air trap with fuel, and then close off the quarter turn valve, and it should stay full of fuel. If there's an air leak, the air will start to show up in here, and eventually this will all fill with air because the air is coming in through the bottom of this T and going to the filter. But if there's air in it, it'll keep going up straight into that air trap, and I can tell if there's an air leak before the secondary fuel filter. So that was helpful too, and that definitely showed that I had air leaks previously, and I'm hoping now I will not. I did not have any air leaks when I was bypassing my big racors and going through a small racor. So that's where I am now, and this seemed to work pretty well. Once in a while I see references to air leaks and how to find them on marine sites, websites, and discussion forums, so I thought this might be a helpful addition to that discussion. After rebuilding my dual Racor 900 filters, I went on about a 8-day cruise from Englewood, Florida to Lake Okeechobee and back. And this was the first real test I'd had of whether or not the Racors were still leaking air. So when I started out, I had gone for about an hour and a half or so when I checked the air traps, and sure enough, I had air in them. So at my next stop, I bled the air out, and that happened 2 or 3 times, and I was pretty discouraged. But then after I had bled the air out of the air traps for probably 3 or 4 times, the air stopped coming. And for the rest of the trip, I didn't have any air. So that was good. It looked like rebuilding the Racors did the trick, and this was the successful end to many years of frustration trying to track down this air leak. The images that you're seeing while I'm doing this part of the video, one is the earlier version of the air trap that I first put on the Cummins diesel in my 42-foot trawler. That's where I was really having the problem. The other image is air trap that I put on my 32-foot trawler right next to the small Racor, just to make sure that I wasn't getting any air in that. And I wasn't. That one I didn't put a quarter-turn valve on the top. I just put a little pipe plug and I filled it with a medicine dropper. So it's just a little bit more about how I went about tracking down the air leak on my marine diesel engine.